As I begin today, I want us to take a moment, if we could, to remember, to sit in the pain of what happened 20 years ago yesterday. Clearly, 9/11/2001 was one of the most horrific days in our corporate memory. So please, for a moment, observe silence as we recall the victims of 9/11 and as we give thanks for the remarkable servants of compassion who responded to the needs of so many, and as we mourn the loss of our innocence. Many of you know that we began our faith formation classes today, and in our adult class, we have started discussing Anna Lemke's new book, Dopamine Nation: Finding Balance in an Age or the Age of Indulgence. Lemke's work recognizes that you and I are living in a particularly, and I say she's right on this, a particularly addictive and indulgent time and land. And in the book, Lemke examines the role our brains and dopamine, that which transports information in our body from nerve to nerve, plays in addiction and indulgence. And one of her primary points is that both pleasure and pain are processed in the same place in the brain, and that the brain longs to keep those two things in balance. I want you to think of a teeter-totter. The brain longs and is wired to keep pain and pleasure in balance. It struggles, however, when there's too much of one or the other. And we are living in a world, Lemke claims, that feeds us with too much of almost everything, especially that which promises pleasure and stimulates dopamine. And the consequence is often addiction. Addiction to alcohol, to drugs, to food, to sex, to gambling, to the news, to video games, to cell phones, to information, you name it. We are living in a world and a culture addicted. Lemke suggests that what is helpful to do in such a world is what we don't want to do, and what much of the culture runs from, and that is to sit in the pain, to press on the pain side of the balance. But who in the heck wants pain? I know I don't. I grew up with a dentist who did not use Novocaine when filling cavities, and I had loads of them, because he was convinced that people were entirely too wimpy. Well, when I moved to Toledo, my new dentist, who, by the way, sat me down and expressed interest in my smile needs, he used Novocaine. Now, I don't really think I have any smile needs, but I will take the Novocaine over no Novocaine any day. I prefer to be wimpy. And I want to say that. I think Dr. Budke's dead now, but I want to say to him, I prefer to be wimpy, Dr. Budke, who, by the way, got punched by my sister because you gave her too much pain. As I look back at it, the pain of having cavities filled did not make me a better person. It just made me hurt. So I'm not advocating that you just really get excited about pain. But I think Anna Lemke is onto something. We in this culture have clearly tilted the pleasure-pain teeter-totter toward the pleasure side. Many of us run from pain. We try to eliminate grief quickly. We do our best to remove inconvenience at every turn. We medicate a variety of emotional and spiritual struggles through drugs and alcohol and shopping and video games and social media. We do not press on the pain side. You know, as I read what Jesus says in Mark today, I just had this great feeling that Jesus was pressing on the pain side. Then he began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering, be rejected, and be killed by the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. And Peter's response is your and my response, no way. Mark then tells us that Peter began to rebuke Jesus. Now, the word rebuke is the word used in the Gospel of Mark when Jesus cast demons out of people. So Peter this day is bothered big time by Jesus' words, and I understand that. We'd much rather lean on the pain side of the teeter-totter. Peter and the other disciples are developing something really good in this movement, something that has brought so much life to them. And Jesus is at the center of that something good. And now Peter is learning that Jesus may not be around. That who was so central to who he was becoming would soon be gone. And he says, and we all say, no way. Don't tell me that. But as we do so, Jesus rebukes us. Jesus rebukes Peter. Actually, in the harshest terms that we ever hear in all of the Bible, he calls Peter Satan. Get behind me, Satan. Your mind is not on divine things, but on human things. Wow. The things of God involve an honest confrontation with pain. The things of God involve recognizing that everybody is not going to like you. That indeed you may be rejected. That love sometimes will take you to the hard places. The mission and ministry of love is never, ever easy. Mark tells us that Jesus must undergo great suffering. That word must in the Greek suggests divine necessity. Now, many folks have interpreted this divine necessity as meaning that Jesus had to die because it was all a part of some bigger plan. And frankly, I understand why some folks reach this conclusion because the Bible in some ways suggests it. But for me, the necessity of Jesus dying has more to do with where love always takes us. When you love, when you really love, there will be pain. It's why grief is so hard sometimes. When you love and when you lose somebody, you hurt. Deep grief is often, not always, but often a sign of deep love. I love what Lord Tennyson said, it is better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. Life lived best involves loving, which involves pressing on the pain side. Jesus, in pressing on the pain side, not only speaks of what his future will be, he speaks of what the future will be for his disciples. According to Mark, he says to all of them, he says to the disciples and to the crowd, if anyone to follow me, they're going to have to pick up their cross, take up their cross, deny themselves, and then follow me. To be a part of the love movement is to take up the cross, is to lean into the pain side, is to deny yourself. Now, truthfully, When the disciples of Jesus heard this, they probably thought in very literalistic ways. His movement was a threat to a lot of people, and so to follow Jesus meant that perhaps you too were going to receive what was going to happen to him. You too might be done away with, as many folks tried to do away with Jesus. And the disciples need to be prepared for this, Jesus is saying in Mark today. Now, for the most part, you and I don't face this kind of threat in the culture in which we live. Christianity has, and it continues to have, a privileged place in this culture. But the message is nonetheless clear. If we want to be up to what Jesus is up to, we've got to get over ourselves. Now, personally, I think people have misinterpreted getting over yourself. They have often thought that they didn't matter, that's what that means. You don't really matter that much. It has created a boatload of false humility, and I grew up in a family of a boatload of false humility. Often I have to say my aunts, they were women. Oh, I'm just taking up my cross. Oh, I'm not worth much, so just walk all over me. This is not what we're talking about, getting over yourself. That kind of false humility has caused some women and other oppressed folks to put up with abuse and poor treatment. I'm just dying to myself. Well, getting over yourself is not false humility. It's not discounting yourself. It's recognizing that at its core, life is not about protecting yourself, defending yourself, or even justifying yourself. Life at its deepest, life rooted in love, is life that is willing to risk, willing to depend not on how well you do in the popularity polls, willing to get over the need constantly to prove your worth and value. Hear this and hear this clearly. You've got worth. You've got value. It all comes as a gift, and therefore you are free to risk. You're free to let go. You're free to swallow your pride once in a while and say, I was wrong. You're free, as we will hear next week, to admit that you, like everybody else, are vulnerable. You're free to admit you don't have it all together. Getting over yourself is really a matter of freeing yourself. But yes, getting over yourself is also a matter of pressing in on the pain side. Because all of us do all that we can to avoid the pain side. We would prefer to press on the pleasure side. It is really, really hard to let go of the self. There's a lot that has to die when we do so. And dying is not at all easy. Jesus, when he teaches about all this, says something quite intriguing. What will it profit human beings to gain the whole world and forfeit their life or forfeit their soul? Indeed, what can human beings give in return for their life or their soul? Now, honestly, as you read this part of Mark, you are dealing with what folks call marketplace talk. It's Jesus' way of saying you can't buy your way into real life. You can have everything that Jeff Bezos or Warren Buffett has, but that will not protect you from death, nor, and this is probably more important to me, nor will it provide you the really deep things of life. You can have everything and lose your soul. This is not at all about going to hell when you die. It's about having a life that matters now. What is so intriguing about this to me in light of our conversation about pain and pleasure is that very often the marketplace is where we go. Even in the middle of a pandemic, it's where we go to lean on the pleasure side of the teeter-totter. No surprise that one of the greatest addictions of our time is buying. It's no wonder that one of the greatest challenges of our time is hoarding. It's no shock that many of our homes are jammed, packed, filled with stuff. Buying, and I know how this works personally, and as I watch other folks, buying and consuming cause the dopamine to flow. They give us pleasure. And in some ways, that's fine. We are real human beings with real human needs. Stuff is a part of the goodness of life. You're not going to take my bike away from me. But what is hard for us to grasp is that sometimes, not always, but sometimes it's a cover-up. Sometimes it's a matter of running away from pain, pressing too hard on the pleasure side, taking the teeter-totter all the way to the ground. And Lemke suggests that the brain is not wired for dealing with too much pleasure. What's the result? Addiction. And in case you don't know this, I think most of you do, addiction often brings with it deep pain. So, often when we avoid pain, we take ourselves into deeper pain. I don't know about you, but when I hear Jesus say the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be killed, and when I hear him say, if anyone to become my followers, let them deny themselves, pick up their cross, I find it hard to discover good news there, to be honest with you. Dying and pain always seems like bad news to me. Now, without glorifying pain, much of which is awful and needs to be eliminated, like Dr. Budke's pain, I must say, though, that pressing on the pain side sometimes is really good news. Jesus said he must die, must be rejected, and be killed, and on the third day rise. Death leads to resurrection. Repressing the pain only leads to more pain, and sometimes greater pain. Pressing on the pain sometimes leads to more life. Life that is full. Life that isn't a cover-up. Life that is a Jesus kind of life. Amen.